time when most of Zimbabwe's hospitals lack basic equipment, Harare will pay out $3.5 billion to farmers whose land was expropriated 25 years ago. $3.1 million was disbursed in March of 2025 to 378 farmers, and more funds will be dished out in stages till 2028. The payouts are part of a 2020 deal between the country, former farmers, and Western financial institutions. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe took back millions of hectares of land that had been violently grabbed by settlers during colonialism and redistributed among the indigenous population. This happened after the British government reneged on a 1979 agreement to fund a land reform program as a way to address the legacy of its colonial occupation. In response to the land expropriation, the West, led by the UK and the US, hit Zimbabwe with crippling sanctions. These have left the country's economy in tatters, with the government struggling to provide basic services. This has led it to cave in to Western demands to allocate critical but meager resources to compensating beneficiaries of settler colonialism. The country has essentially been punished for rightfully taking back what belongs to its people. It's another example of why it's important and urgent for Africa to unite, so that together we can stand up to this kind of brazen bullying.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa, a collaborative effort between Authentic African and Gloria Ayo, where we break down this week's breaking news and its impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. Today, we're going to dive into Zimbabwe's white farmer land compensation. We're going to talk about a bunch of different stories. But before we get into that, we have a new member of the team, a new co-host for This Week in Africa. I will turn it over to you to do your introduction before I introduce myself.
Thank you so much for having me, Authentic African. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Gloria Ayo, and as you said, and I tell African stories. I think that's the best way to describe it. So yeah, I don't think I've ever gone live with anything African related. So I'm excited to be a part of this.
Nice. And so welcome. And so Gloria, has been doing this for many years, reporting on things on the continent. And she also has been, as she mentioned, been talking about all things Africa on her platform. And so I thought it'd be great to have her discuss these African stories and to give her viewpoint and give some context on some of these things as they happen weekly, and to ensure that we're back on a weekly basis telling you guys what's happening on the continent, because you've been asking for it and we are back. So with that being said, I am Joe Hatagwa, your co-host. I am the founder of Authentic African. My goal is to help people do one of three things: travel, invest, and move to the continent of Africa, technically in that order. That's the goal. And so, this platform and this live stream is meant to kind of help us talk about what's happening on the continent so we can make better decisions about the future of the continent and we can be more engaged. So with that, let's get into the first story. I guess I could do a rundown of all the stories we'll go through today, just so you guys are aware. We are going to start with the white farmers and getting the $3 million payout from the Zimbabwe government. We're going to talk about the Kenyan police firing tear gas during the school drama festival in Kenya. Gabon election is also going to be discussed. We're also going to talk about Trump's tariffs, etc. That's what we're going to cover today. Feel free to ask us questions along the way. If there's time, we will answer your questions where needed. So really quickly, we got Angela Amadou in the building. Let's hear from actual African women from West Africa. Well, that's what you got. An actual African woman from West Africa. She's here.
Present.
She's here. All right, cool. So let's get into the first story. So the decision by Zimbabwean government to spend billions of dollars on compensating white settler farmers whose land was expropriated. Expropriated. During the country's land reform program in early 2000s has sharply divided opinions. According to the country's finance minister, 3.5 billion will be paid out by 2028. Critics say the billions could instead be used to address the many challenges the country is currently facing, mainly due to sanctions that the West has imposed on the country as retribution for the land reform program. They say it does not make sense to spend to appease the beneficiaries of colonialism at a time when the country's hospitals lack basic drugs and equipment. So, some also add that the payments amounts to capitulation to bullying by the West, which for years has demanded that Harare pay the farmers. However, those who support the decision say that the government is simply trying to end the pain of Western imposed sanctions and has few options on the table with which to bargain. They argue that the country's economy will continue to bleed as long as the sanctions remain. So just for context, just to make sure it's clear, the Zimbabwe government sanctions were put on them, which affected and somewhat crippled their economy because they had the taken land back from colonizers. So as a way to get those sanctions lifted, Zimbabwe has decided to compensate these farmers who they took land back from. So to be clear, so we're going to jump into another video which does a little bit of a deeper dive, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
July 2020, government and dispossessed white commercial farmers signed a $3.5 billion global compensation agreement for improvements made on the land. Farmers were to be paid 50% within 12 months and the balance over 5 years. After defaulting on 2 scheduled payments, Zimbabwe's government is now offering 10-year bonds to pay the bill.
You know, they might be denominated in US dollars today, but the chances are that farmers will only get 10 cents in the dollar when they mature. And so, or that they just get rolled over for another 10 years or another 10 years after that. And so we do not believe that this is something that we will accept.
Thousands of white farmers were evicted from land when Zimbabwe embarked on land reforms 2 decades ago. Some of the former commercial farmers have fallen on hard times, while others who are advanced in age feel time is running out and would welcome any type of windfall. But they are being urged not to accept the current terms.
I believe that we just have to take a long-term view. We cannot, because of the desperation of some, take a huge knock and accept government bonds, which actually won't benefit those people anyway.
Freeth, whose family successfully challenged the evictions at the SADC tribunal in 2008, says there are alternatives.
There are a lot of farmers who have gone to other countries. They've been very successful in places like Zambia. They would be willing to come back to Zimbabwe to get those farms that are at the moment unproductive back up and running. If property rights were able to exist, it would be a far cheaper option for government.
Compensation of the white farmers is one of the key pillars of Zimbabwe's debt clearance strategy, which will help it regain access to international credit. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare.
All right. So, Gloria, I'd love to hear your thoughts on not only this video, but the land compensation or the compensation for land that is planned and has already begun and is underway.
So let's dissect what is being compensated. When Zimbabwe seized the white-owned farms under the 2000 land reform program that you've talked about and the lady explained in the video, they took the land itself. They took all the infrastructure on the land. That includes farmhouses, barns, irrigation systems, roads, etc. Now, the government is not paying for the land itself. And that's because land in Zimbabwe is now considered state property. So instead, what they're doing is the compensation is only going to cover the infrastructure improvements that the farmers had built on the land before it was taken. So for this initial phase, we're looking at $311 million. The first cash disbursement was $3.1 million. That's just 1% upfront. The rest is going to be $307.9 million, and that will be paid as the white farmer explained in the video, through special US dollar bonds that could take 2 to 10 years to fully pay out. And you're talking about an additional 2% interest added. So these bonds are basically a promise to pay the farmers over time, but they're not going to have immediate cash in hand. They're not, the government, the Zimbabwe government is not going to be paying everything at once because they don't want an economic collapse. So in essence, this is Zimbabwe's way of acknowledging wrongdoing without reversing land reform necessarily. It is also them trying to repair relations, as we heard in the video, with global lenders, because Zimbabwe has longstanding debt issues. We're talking a debt of $21 billion. And because Zimbabwe is behind on payments, it can't get much help from international lenders. And so how do the white farmers feel about all this? They feel, obviously, they're not going to like it. They think it's unfair. They want cash. They don't want bonds. They're also saying that this doesn't cover the full loss, especially not the value of the land. There's even a group representing many of the displaced white farmers. They rejected the deal, saying that the payments are not sufficient and that what they're being offered is just a token amount. They want these farmers to get immediate cash payments, not long-term bonds, especially because a lot of them are elderly now. So it's like, when will they actually get their money? Another argument is that this compensation does not address the land's value, but is only focusing on infrastructural improvements. I think it's a very complicated one for Zimbabwe because it is trying to reconcile past policies with what's going on today as far as its economy and its social realities. So it's going to be a very interesting one I mean, they are acknowledging it, I guess, but it's very tricky. It's almost as if, and I think that's what the points the white farmers are making. It feels like, this is just tokenism. You're just trying to appease the West, as other critics are saying. It's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. And I guess my initial thoughts are, look, the way the land was taken, I think I'm interested to see exactly how it was taken. I am pretty sure it wasn't sold for its rightful value at the moment in which it was taken. And so, that the idea that, that has been spoken about in South Africa, you take my car, right? I take my car back from you, and now you want me to pay you after I've taken my car back that you stolen from me.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with this land, right? So, look, I get that the people who were removed from the land in the 90s weren't the people who taken the land to begin with, but they were benefiting from some other people's loss.
Yes.
And so it was just going back to them. Now, because of that, of course, the West has imposed sanctions and doesn't want to lend money to a country that is already in debt and who's looking to lend more. And also in order to do different kind of business deals, etc. So, I don't, like you said, I think it's a difficult decision for them to make. I honestly think if they have to do this decision to do a deal with the West, this is probably the best possible answer, because you don't want to cripple yourself by giving cash. You might want to say you're acknowledging it because it requires it to do these deals. But at the end of the day, the land should still be in the hands of the Zimbabweans, the indigenous folks on the ground. And so if you have to do 10-year bonds, then do the bonds, right? Like whatever it looks like. That's my opinion. So there's some thoughts here. Dominique says, agreed, the original dispossession needs to be addressed. Khadijah says, right, very interesting how they're crying about stolen land. Yeah.
It's just so ironic, especially in light of what's going on in South Africa.
Right.
With the land reforms. I guess Zimbabwe is going the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And
would it have been safer, not to put you on the spot, but would it have been safer for Mnangagwa the president to just be like, you know what, hey, we're just going to move forward and, have a level playing field, but we have to, come on. That, because when it happened in the 2000s, Mugabe was really violent with it. Like there was violence. They straight up took their land back. And interestingly, there are Africans who understand that. Like it's not like y'all took the land peacefully to begin with.
Right. And so, I think, what's interesting is the what it reminds me is the concept of like you and a sibling get into a fight, right? And your parents see you when you hit them back, and now you get punished, but even though they hit you first, right? So what's happening now is that the West is like, hey, that was violent what you guys did in the 2000s, right? Right? So like, hey, you can't do that, So America, the parents, is now punishing the Zimbabweans for punching back.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that to me, I think is the issue at the heart of this. And I, look, it was taken violently. I don't think that I'm not for the idea of an eye for an eye. That's not necessarily my personal stance, but I understand people who have taken that approach and that stance on the continent and other parts of the world, because if you've been subjugated for so long, and this is, we all know that land and farmland in particular, especially across the continent of Africa, is really where wealth and generational wealth can be sought after and achieved. And so without it, you're losing a lot. So Andy G says, just take the land back. Well, they did. They did. So the idea now is to compensate the folks that they took it from.
And speaking of punishing, of course, we know now Trump came for South Africa because of Elon Musk's claim about white farmers being, their lands being taken and being displaced. And of course, he offered them refugee status in the US.
Right.
Very ironic, but it's all just interesting. You can see some contrast, with what's going on in Zimbabwe and what's going on in South Africa. I think that's interesting.
Absolutely. Especially offering refugee status when saying other people are not allowed to have refugee status anyway.
And they're not taking it.
And they're not taking it either. Okay. So with that, I definitely want to move into the next story. Any other final thoughts on that one?
That would be it for me. Thank you.
So the next story now is we're going to talk a little bit more about the U.S. and Africa's involvement. Now, a little over a week and a half ago, you guys might remember, the world was in an uproar because of tariffs. And there were a number of different tariffs imposed. And by the way, they're on hold for 40 days, 90 days, 90-day hold. So they may be reinstituted. So to be clear, they're not gone. It's just the only current tariff in place is the one with China. And that's changing by the hour. But as it pertains to the continent of Africa, which is what we're focused on, we want to talk about how this could potentially affect the continent. And so I'm going to start with just kind of giving some thoughts on this, and then we'll get into a video. So the Trump administration's new tariff regime had significantly impacted African economies, particularly those reliant on exports to the United States. So the tariffs announced on the 2nd of this month were meant to impose at least a baseline of 10% duty on imports from most countries, with higher rates up to 50%, targeting nations with larger trade deficits or deemed to have unfair trade practices. This policy effectively ends the preferential trade benefits African nations enjoyed under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which had provided duty-free access for thousands of products since 2000. So we're going to talk a little bit about Lesotho's economy, how it's severely affected, the broader economic fallout, the end of AGOA benefits, and the shift towards China. But first, let me play a video that kind of walks you through some more of the details, and we'll give some thoughts on the other side.
Lower income and poor.
Sorry, let's start.
Walk us through what is going to be the likely impact on many of these nations, which tend to be lower income and poorer nations to begin with. How much of a toll are these higher tariff rates going to have on these economies?
Yes, it was alarming to see the sharp increase in the tariffs that the U.S. has imposed. You're right to say Lesotho, which is a small mountain kingdom, one of the poorest countries on the continent, has been slapped with a tariff of 50%. It appears as though the Trump administration gave the highest tariffs to countries that run trade surpluses with the United States. So basically, they export more to the U.S. than they import. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of these these countries that are in this position are there because of policies advised by the US administration. Lesotho, for instance, and Mauritius, which was slapped with a 40% tariff, export apparel to the United States, and that's under a duty-free access trade agreement they had with the US, which was the administration's way of trying to help these countries develop. Now it seems they're being penalized for doing so well on the export front.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it seems as though the Trump administration wants to come up with deals with various trading partners. What are the kind of deals that these nations can push for? Because they don't actually have a lot of bargaining power, economic leverage to begin with. So how are they planning on dealing with this?
That's a good question. So I can speak for bigger economies like South Africa, which will be impacted in terms of its automotive products as well as the agriculture industry. They're already talking about a delegation led by the trade minister that will be going to the United States to try and engage the US administration to make concessions. In the case of South Africa, in terms of what they can bargain, as you're probably aware, Elon Musk is seeking to get his company Starlink to operate in the country. That's probably something they could consider. But for small countries, like you mentioned, like Lesotho, there's very little they can do. They can't suddenly push up their demands to erase that trade balance because consumption or purchasing power is very low in that country. It's a poor country, as I mentioned. So for small countries like Lesotho, we are concerned in terms of what it means for them going forward. It does imply that exports will fall substantially. Keep in mind, exports account for 10% of GDP. So that will be a significant hit to the country's income as well as to its currency. And if foreign exchange inflows slow down, we are concerned about them meeting their foreign obligations.
Walk us.
All right. So so speaking of the trade deficits, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then I have some thoughts on it as well. So just in terms of and I know we have 2 more videos to watch that kind of do a little bit more of a deeper dive into Lesotho's economy and how they export to the United States, which, by the way, it's very hard to import stuff from the US if you're another country because the US doesn't make a lot of stuff. I don't know how aware people are of that. The United States is a consumer economy. Anyway, sorry, I wanted to get your thoughts. Please, let's get your thoughts, and then I have my own. Please.
Just on the whole, well, I want to speak on how this is. I don't know if that answers what you want him to touch on, but how this is impacting Africa. So obviously, when Trump was coming in, we know Trump has some supporters in Africa who love Trump and all, but things we didn't factor in besides the fact that, from a religious angle or from an ideological angle, some people from an economical angle, I think people didn't put too many thoughts into some of what could be considered extreme that Trump could do. And now we see with these tariffs, this is just one example, how that's trickling down and affecting African sectors such as agriculture, textiles, and mining, areas that we didn't even know. I guess we took for granted because of protection from organizations like AGOA. Zimbabwe, for instance, because we just talked about Zimbabwe and how Zimbabwe is trying desperately to look good with the West, right? Zimbabwe actually became the first country to suspend all tariffs on US imports. That was their way of China, to soften Trump's blow. And President Mnangagwa stated that this was to help maintain a positive relationship with the US and to encourage bilateral trade. So their approach actually contrasts with other African nations that are facing US tariffs. And as we had mentioned, they're making efforts to re-engage with the international community. And one of the challenges of removing tariffs, though, is that it may expose local industries to competition from cheaper US imports, even though we don't have a lot of them. And this could hurt domestic production. The biggest one, as we all know, is Lesotho's tariff, which is 50% on garment exports. And just last month, during a speech to Congress, Trump criticized the idea of sending $8 million to promote LGBTQI plus rights in Lesotho, claiming it's a country nobody has ever heard of, which is ironic because on one hand, Trump is dismissing Lesotho as a country nobody has ever heard of. And on the other hand, he's slapping the highest tariff on them, 50%. And this is devastating their biggest export industry. And even more ironic is the fact that Lesotho's garment sector supplies brands that Americans wear daily: Levi's, Wrangler, Calvin Klein. So Lesotho has obviously gained a lot from AGOA, which has allowed it to trade freely, to have access to the US market. Last year alone, it exported $237 million worth of garments to the US. That was about 10% of its GDP. And now this unknown country might lose 30,000 jobs. And they have mostly women workers. About 80% of them are women, because some are single mothers, some are primary breadwinners. So when tariffs threaten the industry, it's not just about trade, it's about the survival of tens of thousands of households in one of Africa's smallest and most vulnerable nations. The government has expressed concern over these developments, and they're hoping to engage with the US, as we heard in that video. And then Cote d'Ivoire, the world's largest cocoa producer, is facing a proposed 21% tariff on cocoa exports. This is a $3.68 billion industry. So it's a very important industry to Cote d'Ivoire's economy. It's going to affect the livelihood of millions of its citizens. And Cote d'Ivoire supplies around 40% of the global cocoa market. So these tariffs could not only destabilize the local economy, it could disrupt global chocolate supply chains. So that's going to have a ripple effect. Prices of chocolate, for instance, are going to be increased. The entire chocolate industry is going to be disrupted. So what the government of Cote d'Ivoire is trying to do now, well, it has stated that it's going to be raising cocoa prices, or it might raise cocoa prices, which could in turn affect American consumers by increasing chocolate costs. They're also looking at alternative markets in the European Union, for instance. So this way they're able to offset potential declines in US demand. Of course, we know that Nigeria was affected, Madagascar, a lot of countries, but the ones that I think are most glaring, especially because of how they're approaching it, how they're trying to mitigate, another country would be South Africa. They were hit with a 31% tariff, and that affects two of their key sectors, the automotive and the citrus industries. So the automotive sector, for instance, includes major international manufacturers. We're talking BMW, Ford, Mercedes-Benz, that operate within South Africa and relies heavily on exports to the US. So this is, and with South Africa, it's definitely personal because of, how Trump feels about South Africa, and obviously the whole drama with land reforms, and of course, which countries they're allying with, Palestine, Israel. So that definitely is, and if South Africa gets hit, there could be factory slowdowns. It could affect a lot. And of course, their citrus industry. South Africa is among the world's top citrus exporters. So they're also facing risks with this. And, it's a huge market for like oranges, lemons, soft citrus. So that's what I'm saying. This tariff situation is really making us understand, wow, Africa is so blessed. Because if they now get hit with the tariffs, they're going to be having countries like Mexico or Spain. That will be like they're going to be in competition with them, and that's not good for South Africa as far as their economy goes. But we'll see how that goes. So I like that I think African nations should really reconsider their trade strategies. And I think there could be a silver lining. Hopefully, if they do it properly, there could be a silver lining. We could learn to rely on ourselves, like, for instance, the African Continental Free Trade Area has been getting more action because of this. It's been gaining some momentum. So that could be an advantage for us.
Yeah, I agree with all of what you said. And there's another video I want to play, but before I get into it, so just to speak about the trade deficit, which I think is interesting, right? Because America is a consumer economy and society, right? Americans don't like to be sold, but they do like to buy. And so, you can go to a dollar store, right? What products do you think are made in America at the dollar store or Target or Walmart, right? Yeah. So the idea that all of these consumer goods are going to be exponentially more expensive is going to have a huge impact on the consumer economy in the United States. I think that's one that does not get talked about as much. Yes. I know we as a group care about what happens in Africa, right? And that's why we're having this discussion. And of course, that is the most important element to this discussion. But just another piece that I don't think people think about is the impact it will have on the United States and the increase in cost for those consumer goods, right? And so that also means, if everybody was complaining about the former administration and the issue with increased prices, imagine what that's going to look like when you can artificially increase prices because you made a decision and a direct policy that has a direct impact on what prices can cost. So to your point, though, Gloria, you mentioned, Africa, and we've talked about this on this podcast or this live stream and other live streams on the platform about the idea of Africa as a continent relying more on each other. I think one of the biggest challenges at least in terms of what we're talking about in terms of genes and things like that, is that we're not as on the same level of a consumer economy as on a continent as America is, right? And the same issue is happening with China, right? China has a higher likelihood of being able to recover even faster, even with the higher tariffs, because they distribute to more places around the world, and because they still can they have other things that they can do to artificially float themselves for some time, right? So I do think that if we figure out as a continent how to work together better, I think you can probably lessen some of the challenges. But I don't know if we could completely shift away. So really quickly, I do want to play another video because I want to talk about some of those consumer goods that you mentioned, so that you guys may get an idea of. And there's two videos, so I'll just play them back to back, so that we could talk about what some of those specific goods are before we move on to the next topic. We'll add some more thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Shoppers will have to pay 50% more for a pair of jeans made in Lesotho. The steep price hike follows US President Donald Trump slapping the Southern African country with a 50% import tax. Washington says Lesotho is one of the worst offenders in lopsided trade with the US, shipping $237.3 million worth of products to the US, mainly textiles and diamonds, while importing just $2.8 million. Analysts have pointed out the irony of Lesotho being punished for its success under the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA, a US program to support sub-Saharan African countries do more business with the US. Lesotho has made denim jeans for mega brands such as Levi's, Old Navy, Calvin Klein, Gap, and Walmart, exporting them duty-free to the US. Interestingly, Trump's branded Greg Norman golf t-shirts are made in Lesotho, a country Trump claimed nobody has ever heard about. Lesotho's garment factories employ about 30,000 people, mostly women, directly and indirectly benefiting many of Lesotho's population of 2.3 million people. 45% of its exports go to the United States, so Trump's tariffs risk wiping out nearly half of Lesotho's exports. With a GDP per capita of just over $1,100, Lesotho cannot afford to purchase huge quantities of US goods, and now Trump is punishing them for it.
So, I mean, you spoke so much of that already. You talked about the workforce. No, that was good though. I mean, you talked about the workforce. You talked about the some of the brands. I even mentioned Walmart. I didn't even realize until I watched this video that Walmart was some of the jeans that you find in Walmart, and Calvin Klein and some other jeans. And then of course, what's interesting is some of the golf shirts worn at Trump's golf courses are also produced and made there. So look, cheap labor is great for American-based companies, who are all focused on capitalism, right? That is why they export their work elsewhere. Number one, because American workers aren't going to be willing to do it. We already have known that for a long time. Two, we have minimum wages that are much higher because the cost of living is higher in the United States. So most businesses are exporting a lot of the development of their products to other places, right? And they bring them back. An example of that, I think we mentioned this before, the iPhone costs $10 to make and landed at US. I'm not sure exactly what the total amount is, but I know it costs $10 to make, and they charge $1,300 or more for each new device, right? So just think about those kinds of margins that they have. The iPhone, to keep that same kind of margin, I think I was told it was going to have to cost over a couple $1,000. No, sorry, was it $8,000 to keep the same margins? $8,000 to $10,000 for an iPhone if you were to try to onshore that back in the United States. And also that just requires a certain level of skill, just like, dexterity. Have you guys ever gone to an African braider? I used to have cornrows, and the dexterity in African hands is a different kind of level, which is why all these women can work in these factories to do the sewing and all the different things, because this is something that you can do better on the continent of Africa than most people can do in the United States. So I just wanted to add that point. I don't know if you had any other points on this topic, but I just wanted to add that as well.
You're absolutely right. And I think of places like Kano in Nigeria with the leather.
Yeah.
And all the theories out there about how it's taken to Europe or taken to China, and then, we don't get the credit for it. But there's superior leather in Kano that's big. And if we're going to, obviously, there's a huge contrast when it comes to China. China is so self-sufficient, and that's why they can call Trump's bluff till the very end. Shein, I don't know if you're familiar with Shein.
Of course.
You said, of course. I saw a post on Instagram yesterday with Shein saying, sorry, guys, we're going to have to increase our prices if XYZ happens starting sometime in April. People went wild. Like, oh my gosh, not Shein, my Shein. Like, I heard all kinds of jokes. I mean, it was ridiculous. But that shows you the power of, like you said, America is so big with consuming that at the end of the day, China is going to be very all right, And I wish African countries can learn from China. China wasn't always great. We have everything it takes. You're talking about the dexterity. That takes me back to Kano with the leather. It's the dexterity. The women in Lesotho with the garments and the 20% that are men. We have China wasn't always great. And now look at them,
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, they obviously figured out how to focus on manufacturing, and they themselves were heavily reliant on the United States too. So, but they, as we mentioned, they can move on. But it's really hard to replace the U.S. market no matter what, because the U.S. is, like I said, a heavy consumer economy. We're gluttonous in this country. I mean, if I go downstairs and look at the number of packages from Amazon in my package room in this building that I live in, so it is a different kind of economy, and everyone operates at a surplus for that reason. First of all, my corner store operates at a surplus. They don't give me money back. I go to that corner store every day and buy something. They don't give me anything back. They operate at a surplus. Does that corner store need to pay me something? Anyway, I just think that there are certain practices and businesses that operate in a certain way because of the two that are engaging in it. It was under the guise of helping these sub-Saharan countries, develop, but also it was another area to get free labor or cheap labor, not free labor, but very cheap labor. Now, to America, that's cheap labor. To people in these countries, it is a living. It gives you a way to earn a living that was not available previously. And so, this is going to have long-term economic impacts if it does continue to go through as stated just a couple of weeks ago. So we will have to be on the lookout in 90 days. We'll come back and let you guys know where we landed once that time frame is up. Okay. One last thing on this topic between U.S. and Africa relations. I mean, there's been also talks about visa restrictions, etc. So I did want to play one video just kind of talking about the hypocrisy of the United States and its policies and how we look at other people, considering how the United States has been in its previous history. So I just want to play that, and then we'll give some commentary on the other side.
I watch a lot of Hollywood movies, and I think we agree that Hollywood has become one of the most powerful propaganda machines for America and maybe the CIA. When we think terrorists today, we think of an Arab man who is Muslim. And I'm just trying to think, for a normal person that's going to be listening to this conversation, can a white man be a terrorist? Can a white woman be a terrorist? Because clearly, if someone's going to say that's a terrorist, like, it can't be, it doesn't look. And that becomes profiling. And that, of course, because of the movies, it's been playing in our heads that a terrorist can only look this way. It's like a criminal. When someone says, oh, but he doesn't look like a criminal, you're like, oh, he's not black. He's not wearing a hoodie. He doesn't speak broken English. It's a clean, white woman, polished. Can't be her. That's very dangerous. When we start saying white male America gets to define what is a terrorist, because it will never be a white man.
And remember, this definition has been given by a nation where white men eliminated 50 million American Indians to then create a white world where they wiped out the natives of that land. And it's a terrorist country that terrorized American Indians and continues to terrorize American Indians, giving us a definition of what it is that is a terrorist. And that is intentional.
Now, I say that because of the Aliens Enemies Act and all these other things that are coming and removing birthright citizenship. And I think these are all outcomes of, you know, a foreign policy that is that doesn't look at America the way the United States said that it was initially built, right? For, you know, the idea that it was a melting pot, right? And the idea now is they don't want it to be a melting pot anymore. So I just thought that video was an interesting one to kind of illustrate that point. But yeah, I mean, that speaks to some of the policies that are coming out, right? The idea of trying to end birthright citizenship, you know, sending dissenters to who are on green cards, removing them from the country, rounding up individuals who have tattoos, right? And then also the visa restrictions that we saw, which is specific to Africa because there were a number of different countries. Now, that has not necessarily been implemented. It was an internal memo that got leaked, but it looks like it's a plan. And so, so your thoughts on all of those things, you know, as we wrap up this session on Africa and America relations.
Yeah, and you know, at the end of the day, it is the chickens coming home to roost, this immigration crisis. But you know, when immigrants are abroad in places like America and parts of Europe, and they're treated like, you know, they're just not human. This is basically the repercussion of it, and it's all sad because at the end of the day was the way everything started, how Africa was set up to begin with, how Africa was stolen, that basically led to this situation. And then we come over here. Well, not hey. Africans come over, you know, go to other parts of the world, and then they're treated like they're just like some disease or something. It is the bottom line is we are empowered as a continent. We've seen the videos, we've seen the statistics. We have everything it takes to just be self-sufficient. You know what I mean? And what is likely, I mean, we know the African-China, sorry to bring China into this, but the African-China relations are definitely going to improve more because China treats Africa, yeah, they can be high-handed and I think a little sneaky, but it feels like China treats Africans, if it's strategic, they're playing the game right. It feels like they treat Africans better than Americans do.
Like a partner.
You know, they deal with, if you don't, you know, the whole LGBTQ situation, for instance, and regardless of your beliefs, if an African country is doing what America doesn't want it to do, then you start threatening with aid. You start threatening to take away, you know, to impose tariffs and sanctions and things like that. But China doesn't do that. China doesn't interfere in Africa's politics. And that's why with everything going on now, especially with the tariffs, if these things go into effect, there'll be even more leaning towards China. And that's not good for America.
100%. So, you know, look, I think you said it all there. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is whether we like it or not, you know, however you fall on the political spectrum, this is just a reminder, as you said earlier, that Africa needs to rely on our own like neighbors and partners within the continent. The idea of a United States of Africa is seeming more and more necessary as we go forward. So hopefully, you know, we see that. And look, you know, whether it's from the East or the West, you know, whether it's China or it's the US or the global North, as they call it, or the US, you know, everyone's going to operate with their own self-interest, or their own best interest. And so any deal that you can do with a smaller country, you're going to do it with your own best interest. So, but I think that the difference, as you mentioned, is with China, at least it looks more like a partnership. Even if it's a one-sided partnership, it looks like a partnership. And things actually get developed and they bring workers to do the work and sometimes hire workers here or hire workers there in Africa. Whereas most of what the United States does, and I think that's probably what their biggest issue was, is they gave cash, which never had a direct impact on the people on the ground.
Yes.
Right? It almost always went into the pockets of those corrupt leaders that we all have issues with. And so, so with that being said, we want to now move on to this story in Kenya, because I think it's a really important one to cover. And really, it's unfortunate, but I think it's kind of a follow on to what we saw with the protests recently. So I think what we'll just do is we'll just get right into the story of Kenya, what happened there. We'll play a video, and then we'll give some context on the other side and give our thoughts.
Okay.
Kenya's prestigious National High School Drama Festival was thrown into chaos when police fired tear gas to disperse crowds gathering to watch Echoes of War, a politically charged play by students from Butere Girls' School that mirrors Kenya's societal struggles and youth activism. Initially disqualified under unclear circumstances, the play was reinstated by court order, only for tensions to escalate in Nakuru after its scriptwriter, former Senator Cleophas Malala, was blocked from attending rehearsals and briefly detained. Students boycotted the performance in protest, singing the national anthem and leaving the venue amid heavy police presence. The incident, which included harassment claims and drew large public crowds, sparked national outcry, with rights groups and opposition leaders condemning what they see as a crackdown on free expression and youth voices. The play, seen as a bold commentary on digital activism and generational tensions, has become a symbol of Kenya's ongoing political and cultural battle.
Yeah, so this kind of reminds me of the fact that, if you live abroad in the United States in particular, the First Amendment the freedom of assembly and the freedom of speech, I think, is one that I think many Americans take for granted. And so I think it's important to remember that this isn't the first time that there has been outsized responses to people who are having some sort of protest against the government. You guys might remember there were some folks who experienced loss of life just a little over a year ago in Kenya, protesting there, and it went on for weeks, and we covered that on This Week in Africa previously. And this is just an extension of that. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Gloria, on this particular story and more. And I will be right back.
Okay.
I got a phone call I need to answer, but I will be right back. So I'll let you to answer that, and then I'll come right back.
Yeah. So when they first dismissed the play, the play was initially disqualified under unclear circumstances, and then they reinstated it because of the High Court ruling. So obviously, when Malala, the former senator, when he got detained by police because they didn't want him attending the final rehearsals, the students protested, and man, it was so reminiscent, like you said, of what happened last year in Kenya. And what I'm observing now, and I won't say it's just in Kenya. I mean, this happens throughout Africa, Nigeria, for instance. It's become the norm more than the exception, sadly, for the Kenyan police to use tear gas to disperse crowds that, I mean, these are people who just came to watch a play. Do you know what I mean? And them using that tear gas, which, I mean, I'm going to watch a play and then I'm getting tear gas. Like, what's up with that? But this led to a national outcry because people haven't completely healed. I wouldn't even say they've healed at all from what happened last year, from the people who died last year during the Kenyan protest. And the reason there hasn't been healing is because, they say without justice, there's no healing. What the youth were fighting for, they didn't exactly get the answers to what they were requesting, right?
Right.
They didn't exactly get solutions. And to make matters worse, the government's response, I mean, you have the education minister criticizing Malala's involvement, questioning the appropriateness of a politician writing for students. William Ruto himself has insisted that politics should be kept out of educational settings. And he's saying that they're corrupting young minds. But human rights organizations and opposition leaders have condemned this whole action by the government as suppressive, because now the freedom of expression, which you talked about, that we take for granted here in the US, has been tampered with, right? I mean, the government has a point, and I do see how Malala writing this play could seem like a conflict of interest, but civic engagement should also be encouraged at schools. So I don't find anything logical with what these people are saying. As long as it's peaceful, I don't see what the problem is. So clearly, the government is fighting hard to prevent that which happened last year in Kenya from happening again, right? And for me, it's like, look, if you lead well, same thing with the Nigerian government. If you lead well, you will never have to worry about continuous protest or people speaking up against you. You can't be gagging people from speaking. That's not a democracy, right? People are simply dissatisfied with your government. But all in all, I have to talk about how impressive and how, I'm so impressed by how politically conscious the Kenyan youth are.
Yep.
I mean, these are students. This Kenyan youth right now, as far as the African continent is concerned, I believe that they're definitely out there as far as the future. They're doing things that it's just so impressive. I love to see it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think, and I remember, Ruto fired his cabinet, right? And that was the move, right? To just, don't worry, everything's okay. I'm just going to fire my cabinet. But, obviously, we talked about this previously on a live stream. He came to the United States on something that should have cost maximum $200,000 for over $2 million, right? And obviously he was using the Kenyan taxpayer dollars, and they were doing this new budget that was going to remove more money from the Kenyans, right? And so, conceptually, I think, it's easy for people, they may not totally understand everything that the government's doing, but they know how they feel in their day-to-day lives, and they would not be protesting, as you said, if they led well. They're not leading well, so that's what's leading to those protests. And so the trying to silence them does not help. It actually just hurts them more, and it causes more future protests. The protests, I think this first of all, I think this play was done and the protest happened because it had happened before. Right. If not for that, this play may not have been one that would have been entered. They may not have actually protested when it got removed. Right. I think this kind of thing happens because, the response to how, the response to dissent, civil disobedience, I think is the reason for it. Okay. So with that being said, there's one final story we want to get to today. Yes. And that is there was an election this last week in the country of Gabon, and I just want to do a quick update on it, and then we'll jump into a video. So Gabon just had its first presidential election since 2023 military coup that ended the Ali Bongo's family 56-year rule, him and his father. The election, which happened on Saturday, was seen as a pivotal moment in the country as it sought to transition from military to civilian governance. So some background, in August 2023, there was a coup that ousted President Ali Bongo shortly after he declared victory in a disputed election. The coup was part of a wave of military takeovers in West and Central Africa over recent years, which some people said was undermining democratic process in the region. I think most of the people on the ground would say, in many cases, they were more like revolutions, not coups. However, from that coup came a plea from Ali Bongo when he was on house arrest, and he basically appealed to his friends all over the world to make noise, right? And you guys might remember that. So there was this viral video, and there's a clip that became a social media sensation that was remixed into a dance challenges, memes, and satire. And so I just want to play that video in case you haven't heard it. And I think it is a critique of Bongo's 14-year rule, but also highlights how online communities can repurpose political drama into creative expression. So I'll play a little bit of the song. I don't know if I'll play the whole thing, but I just remember this coming out and everybody was passing this around on WhatsApp. So if you haven't seen it, this is for you guys.
Tell them to make noise, make noise. Tell them to make noise, make noise. I'm calling you, my son, to make noise. My wife, to make noise. All the friends, make noise, really. Tell them to make noise. Noise, noise. Noise. Tell them to make noise. Noise, noise.
All right, you guys got the idea, but shout out to Reflex Sounds for making that video. The compilation video and the music was hilarious. And look, it's yeah, I'd love to, you know what, Gloria, let me get your thoughts on it before I say anything.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how the African humor is humor like none other.
Mm-hmm.
And we always find ways, like the great fella said, you know, we suffer and we smile through it all. So when these coups happen, the way people jubilate, I mean, I'm sure the video wasn't done by somebody from Gabon. Was it a Gabon producer who put it? I don't know.
I'm not sure where he's from. He may be Nigerian.
So
Reflex
people
Sounds
throughout the continent were so invested in this story that they were rejoicing.
Yep.
You know, and that video depicts that. So I just find it very interesting. But did you want to talk about? Oh, you've already talked about the election they had. Did you want me to?
Well, there's going to be a video on that too. We'll get to that, but I wanted to give that background so that people knew, and as you were saying, right? I think we talk about the AES a lot on this platform, and you know how, excuse me, the difference between a coup and a revolution is the number of people who are behind it. A coup is like a few military leaders who want to take over and become in charge, right? A revolution is a groundswell from the people. And so, yes, had it disrupted the democratic process? Did I like to be in Sierra Leone when we had a coup attempt? Not a big fan of coup attempts, no. But I also understand that the people are fed up and they're looking for leaders to come in and change the way things have been.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the AES with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are all aligned in that sense, and they all had military coups or revolutions. And it seems like there are other Western African leaders who are starting to maybe move a little bit more in that direction, even though they were democratically elected. There's some questions about Senegal, there's some questions about Ghana, but it seems like, you know, Mahama in Ghana has been at least meeting with Ibrahim Traore. Ibrahim Traore came to his inauguration. And so, you know, there have been some discussions between the two. And so, yeah, it feels like the people of the continent of Africa are starting to get some of the leaders that they've been so desperately wanted. And, you know, and us who are Pan-Africanists and who believe in the advancement of Africa would like to see more of. With that being said, we do want to kind of talk about what happened in the election and whether or not the people of Gabon are going to get what they're looking for.
According to Gabon's Ministry of the Interior, incumbent head of state Brice Oligui Nguema has just won the presidential elections with 90.35%. Nguema came to power via a coup d'etat on 30 August 2023, ousting his cousin Ali Bongo, who ruled the country for 14 years. Before that, his uncle Omar Bongo had ruled for 41 years. French enterprises Total Energy, formerly ELF, Perenco, and Morel & Prom rely on Gabon for petroleum. Eramet exploits Gabon's manganese, and Rougier Gabon's wood. A fraction of this trade went directly into the Bongo family's personal account. The Bongos quickly acquired signs of wealth, such as luxury vehicles. Like his relatives, Nguema has forged close ties with Western powers. Before being shut down, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, had earmarked $5 million for the Gabonese elections. In October 2024, the U.S. State Department said it was collaborating with the Nguema government on the electoral process. On 22 February 2025, Gabon signed a deal with France for business collaboration between French and Gabonese enterprises. The capital, Libreville, hosts one of the last French military bases in Africa. 200 French troops use the camp to train Gabonese soldiers. Is a Nguema presidency a victory for French and U.S. interests in Central Africa?
That is the question. Is it a victory for Western back interest or a victory for Africa? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this presidential election and Ali Bongo's cousin now being the president, not just direct lineage from the Bongos, but a cousin now.
Yeah, and that was like when he overthrew Ali Bongo, I was like, bro, you're his cousin. I mean, and I understand they have a very small population, so perhaps a lot of them are, well, clearly a lot of them are related, so it's not hard to find somebody related to somebody. But you were his cousin, right? And another thing that was concerning to me is the fact that when he overthrew Ali Bongo, he had promised to help Gabon transition to a true democracy, which is what happened, right? This was the first electoral process since the 2023 military coup. And, Gabon needed that. I mean, that family, as was pointed out, was in power for 56 years. So Nguema now being there and then deciding to run for presidency was very confused. I was like, okay, here we go, right? The power, I mean, everybody just wants power. But basically, you want to do it the right way now is basically what it looks like to me, right? Sure. So he secured a decisive victory, over 90% of the vote. And I mean, it was obvious that he was going to win. I think we talked about that last week. He was definitely going to win. There were 8 candidates total, and he was the front runner. His main opponent was actually, I don't even know why he bothered to run. The former prime minister under Ali Bongo was actually the biggest opponent among the other 7. But the good thing is Gabon had its highest voter turnout since 1993 at 70%. So that says a lot. They are, more confident. And it was a peaceful election. That's also a really good thing compared to what Ali Bongo did 2 years ago, which led to him being overthrown. And that's why it was ironic that I was saying people should make noise when you actually kicked out international observers and you rigged the election beyond belief. And I think he even turned out the power supply or the internet or something like that, just so people wouldn't call out his atrocities, and he ended up being overthrown. And of course, the people were glad. But the big elephant in the room is the fact that while, yes, on one hand, the peaceful and large turnout is great for Gabon compared to that mess of an election in 2023. On the other hand, some argue that this is basically a way to legitimize military rule under the guise of a democratic process.
Right.
And in November of last year, there was a constitution that was adopted through referendum where, well, here are the details of that. A presidential system was now going to have a 7-year term, renewable once. They abolished the prime minister's position, and they had stricter eligibility requirements for presidential candidates. So an extension of the presidential term and the abolition of the prime minister's role looks like, now the executive branch is trying to be a bit too powerful, right? It's like there's now there are concerns that there's a consolidation of power in the executive branch. So will there be adequate checks and balances in Nguema's government? That's the big question. Yep. The main opposition candidate, the former prime minister under Ali Bongo, has expressed concerns. He's talked about electoral fraud, including the use of, I don't think he's even one to talk, but whatever. He's talked about people using unused voting cards that were used. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Again, he isn't one to talk, but there seems to be, in fairness to him, there seems to be a limited success of opposition candidates, right, which could suggest that there were no effective campaigns against the incumbent regime. And I think the people are just like, listen, anything to keep us away from Bongo and anything like Bongo will take. But again, the election was peaceful, which is such a relief. There were observers from the AU, from the EU, they were present. But even they have expressed concerns about the fairness and transparency of the process. Nguema has promised people after the win, he said he was going to restore dignity to Gabon. So all we can do is keep observing and hoping for the best for Gabon.
Fair. Yeah. And I guess I'll just also add, because I think you said it all. But I think the other thing is that that you had mentioned, and I think it's important, is that you can be reelected for 7 years, right? So technically that starts this term, right? So he has 7 years from now, and then another 7 years. So just like Ali Bongo was in power for 14 years, he can also be in power for 14 years, right? That's what we're saying, right? That's basically what he is securing for himself, right? And so, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And so I think that is a thing that we should be worried about. And we'll keep our eye on this and see how it goes. But he's made a lot of promises, and you know, we're going to restore the dignity to Gabon. We will see. We will see.
I'm sorry. I see Traore in the news. I don't see Nguema in the news as much for great things is done in Gabon.
Right.
And it's, I mean, I'm sure Gabon is faring far better or much better than it did under Ali Bongo.
Right.
But I can only hope for the best.
Right. It's a low bar. It's a low bar. The bar was set very low for him to clear. So that's a good point. Okay, so we've gone through a number of different stories today. Any final thoughts on your inaugural This Week in Africa live stream?
I loved this. This was so good. The conversations where I love the engagement from the audience. It's been incredible. I can't wait to be back.
Absolutely. You know, we didn't ask your background. So can you, I mean, not your working background, but your tribal background, so people know where you're from. Who are you, Gloria?
Okay. Somebody said she thought I was South African.
Yes, I saw that. She thought you were South. That's why I threw it out there. She thought you were South African. Angela said, I thought you were South African.
I've gotten that a couple of times. Well, I'm Nigerian, Yoruba and Igbo. So I'm from the two big ethnic groups, or two of the big ethnic groups in Nigeria. I've been in America more than half my life. So I guess I'm Nigerian American, right?
There you go. I say I'm Sierra Leonean American. So
exactly. So that's basically my background. But I am West African. I'm an African from West Africa.
Yes, we represent West Africa over here. Okay, cool. Well, so obviously today was just Gloria and I. There will be times from time to time where we will have other guests on who are reporting on specific stories, who are on the ground in specific places. But at least for this week and probably next week, it'll be the two of us. And this is the format that you guys can expect to see. This is the day for now that we will definitely be going live on, at least this week and next week. We will continue to update you if anything changes. So we will keep you guys posted. But yes, thank you guys all for joining. We appreciate you all joining us. If you've come this far, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. You follow Gloria on her pages. You follow me on mine. Her handle is right there. Authentic African is how you can find our platform, my platform. And just be on the lookout. This coming Sunday, there will be a live stream. Next Monday, there'll be another live stream. And then we will be back with this particular This Week in African live stream next Thursday. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. See you all on the next live.
Bye.